A couple of months ago we did that video on the Gen 3 Hemi camshaft lifter oiling issue, you know, where it wipes out cams and lifters. And video got a lot of views, a lot of comments. And the vast majority of comments were like, you know what, you found it. There were hundreds of guys that wrote in that work on these things. They're fleet mechanics, they're dealership mechanics. They work on these Gen 3 Hemis every day. And after they saw the video, they were like, you know, yeah, you put it together, you figured it out. There were a lot of people that said, no, it doesn't happen to this type of Hemi, it doesn't happen to the 9MDS, it doesn't happen to the Hellcat, it doesn't happen to... But if you read through the comments, every single variation of the Gen 3 Hemi is represented in those comments. And then, of course, there were several people that wrote in and they were like, this guy's an idiot, he doesn't know what he's talking about, that's impossible, blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, well, you know, that's par for the course. But, you know, I would have thought by now it would have kind of like settled out, but it didn't. Like last night, I'm going through Facebook and there I see it again. UTG, he's an idiot, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Gen 3 Hemi, there's nothing wrong with the design, blah, blah, blah. So I think, okay, if I'm the idiot, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up an idiot-proof demonstration that anybody can duplicate. You don't even have to have one of these engines apart. All you need is a lifter and some oil. And this will show you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that what I'm talking about is the actual issue with this engine. So you don't have to go back and watch that whole other video again. Let's recap. Let's go back over to this engine here. So this is a 5.7, and this is a lifter from the 5.7. And what I proposed is that because they raised the camshaft, now normally the cam sits right about here, as you see on a regular engine. Because they raised the cam and they put this main oil feed, this is a tube that runs front to back between the reciprocating assembly and the camshaft. Because they put this tube here, oil that's slung off the reciprocating assembly that normally finds its way to the lifters, to the bottom of the lifters, to the surface between the cam and the lifter. A lot of it is obstructed by this passage and the distance, the increased distance between. Right? Now the reason they did this was to improve the valve train geometry, so that instead of having to have those mousetrap rockers like they have, like say, on the 426 Hemi, so that they can have smaller, lighter, more direct access valve train, they raised the camshaft and they flattened out the angle on the lifters. This was supposedly a recommendation made by a very famous Chrysler engineer who had a lot to do with the development of the 426 Hemi, and this was his suggestion to make this engine superior. And in theory it works. Yes, this thing has a much better valve train geometry, there's no question about it. But they threw the baby out with the bathwater. They missed very simple things. Also on that last video, I proposed that after studying, I have a box of these things, 20, 30 lifters, right? I determined that there's insufficient oiling to the body of the lifter. You could tell by these scuff marks. There's a scuff mark that will always be on one side, and there's like, well, this one doesn't really have it, but some of them, a lot of them have like a tarnishy film on the flip side. So you've got scuff on one side, tarnish on the other. And what that's telling me is that this lifter body isn't being completely surrounded by oil. It's kind of, when the engine is sitting there, you know, running, it's not being completely drenched, surrounded by oil. When Chrysler designed this engine, they decided to feed the hydraulic part of the lifter, right, through the push rods, like a hydraulic lifter slant 6. So because the hydraulic part of the lifter is being supported through the valve train, they didn't make a sufficient oil galley, lifter galley, to support 16 of these lifters. When the engine is running and it's hot and everything is expanded and the oil is thinned down, there isn't enough pressure and volume to keep this thing completely surrounded by oil. And that's what these marks indicate. But the key to this, the most important part of this, is how the roller itself, or I should say the rollers inside the roller, get lubricated. So obviously this is the roller that rides against the camshaft, but in between here, or between this pin and this roller, are several other rollers, smaller rollers, needle bearings. And those are only lubricated by splash. The only way these things can get oil is by oil being slung from the bottom up from the reciprocating assembly, or what migrates down from the lifter bore. Right? And this is normal. This situation isn't unique to this engine. This is every single engine out there. The rollers are always lubricated by splash. So here's where the problem is. And like I said, you guys feel free to duplicate this demonstration any way you want. It's idiot proof. You can't. All right. Here is the lifter at the angle that it sits in the engine. And you can see it's almost completely horizontal. Okay? So now if I take this lifter out and I maintain the angle that it's on, right? And now I pour oil on it, and this would be duplicating what comes from the oil galley. Where is that oil going? It's not going anywhere near the roller. And I'm being very generous with the volume of oil here right now. It's not migrating down to the rollers, to the pins. Okay? Now watch. If we take this same lifter and we put it in a conventional engine, which has the lifters at a conventional angle, now watch what happens when we pour oil on this. Right? Where is the oil migrating to? Okay? One more time for you slow guys. All right? Here's the angle. We'll keep the angle the same, consistent. It doesn't matter how much oil I pour on this thing. It's not migrating down to the rollers. That's what goes bad on these things. Yes, overall, it's an excellent engine. The cylinder heads are great. The valve train is great. These things are great. But they screwed the pooch on the simplest thing. This is stupid. This is like engine design 101. Lifter surfaces, whether they're flat tappet or roller, and especially on a roller, those pins are only lubricated by splash. And when you don't give it sufficient oil around the body of the lifter to migrate down, you don't give it enough of an angle for it to actually run down, and you don't have sufficient splash from the bottom end because you've blocked it with a main oil passage, they're going to go dry. So this is definitely an issue with engines that see, let's say, a lot of stop and go driving, a lot of traffic jams, a lot of idling. Once the engine speed picks up, so let's just say, like for instance, if you live in an area where you just get in your truck and you start your car and you start it up and you hit the gas and there's no traffic, there's you're getting on the highway, you're traveling always 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, you're not going to have this problem. Because there is sufficient splash and motion at that point to keep those rollers saturated. And especially if you've got a high performance engine. Very few people spend time sitting in traffic with their Hellcat or their Demon. So you're much less likely to have this problem. I've heard about revised lifters. They have different. Actually, I had a conversation. I had a guy that I know who I respect a lot. He builds these things for a living. His business is high performance 3rd gen Hemis, and we actually went back and forth on the phone for an hour over this. And he was telling me, yeah, it's different. They're going to design different rollers for the lifters and so on and so on. But for the rollers and pins for the rollers. It's the number of them, it's the diameter of them, and we went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And after an hour or so, he agreed with me. I don't have a fix for this. I don't know how, well, I mean, there are probably several different ways, but I don't have the time or the inclination to design a fix for this. If you want to design a fix for it, go ahead, make yourself a lot of money, because there's a big need for this. But that's it. That's the problem. And there's an idiot-proof demonstration that you could do yourself. And I guess that's it, right? I'll be building this next week. See you tomorrow.